A new wind is rising, bringing change, bringing the all-new Ford Windstar.
The minivan had had a good run. It was positively desirable in the 1980s, but by the 2000s it was something for soccer mums, a van-like vehicle with no panache that was used to lug around your kids and all their stuff. While you were yearning for your carefree years and that sports car you'd always promised yourself, you were instead stuck wallowing around corners in this ugly thing. Ford heard you and they had a solution, the Ford Flex. This was a minivan with attitude, personality and the sort of trim seen on luxury cars. Ford said it drove like a car, not an SUV, and it could get to 60 in 6 seconds. What's not to like? Well, a lot it seems. Why did the Flex fail despite being based on a concept car that got high praise? And despite this, why was it in production for so long? This is the Ford Flex story. In 2003, Ford's minivan, the Windstar, sold fairly well, but the Dodge Caravan and Grand Caravan outsold it almost 3 to 1. What's more, minivans weren't exactly the most exciting thing to own, something you bought with your head, not your heart. Ford wasn't going to beat the competition producing Me Too vehicles that were little more than a refinement of Chrysler's original minivan vision from the early 1980s. No, they needed a new direction. The K-car-like boxy cars from Japan were a new design statement. It first appeared with the 2001 Nissan Chapo concept and came to market as the Nissan Cube. What would the Cube look like with 3 rows of seats, other than a shoebox of course? We got the answer at the 2005 Chicago Auto Show, the Ford Fairlane concept. It was a car that defied categorization. Some thought it had the look of a Scion XB or a Honda Element, or maybe a badass lowered SUV, a night and day difference to the humdrum minivan. Face on, there were reminders of the late 1960s Ford Bronco off-roader with its straight up front, straight sides and white roof. That roof reminded some of the Mini Cooper, itself a throwback to cars from the 50s and 60s. The rear also echoed Fords of old with a centre panel that joined the 2 tail lamps. The 90s had been filled with retro-inspired designs, chiefly the Volkswagen New Beetle, styled by J. Mays, who'd also styled this new concept. The Fairlane name itself was nostalgia, used on American Fords in the 50s and 60s. There were the subtle lines down the side, a reminder of woody cars that themselves referenced the wooden construction of horse-drawn carriages. This was modernism crossed with nostalgia in a car that was taller than the station wagon, but not the height of an SUV. This wasn't a minivan. There were no sliding rear doors for a start. The Fairlane had badass suicide doors. As Ford said, they were rewriting the people mover story. It was a people mover with presence and a vehicle with the power to move people emotionally as well as physically. This was a fascinating concept, but Ford already had a car that addressed this market, the newly launched 3-row Ford Freestyle. Ford's opinion was that there was a lot of demand in this segment. The Freestyle was for those who wanted something more conventional. The Fairlane had more style and elegance. The interior, like the exterior, looked like the future while giving a nod to the past with a plywood dashboard that looked like it had been bought from a local do-it-yourself store. The woody lines continued on the back of the seats that could fold flat to turn this big people carrier into a big cargo carrier. And the rear tailgate could open from the left or right for convenience. The reaction from the press was favourable. This was a bold direction. Ford were taking risks with something exciting and different. The blue oval announced in 2006, the Fairlane concept had been approved for production and will be manufactured in Oakville, Canada, replacing the slow-selling Freestyle minivan. Public focus groups weren't quite as gushing about the styling, some calling it a bread box. There were Ford executives who also weren't sure it was a good idea to take such a bold step, but the design team prevailed. The stylists wanted the design to be polarizing. They wanted people to have strong emotions because for every 2 people that hated it and 1 that was apathetic, if there was just 1 that loved it, you've got a hit on your hands. Just ask the team who created the Renault Twingo. There wouldn't be any major changes to the design, and Ford were bullish about sales projections, expecting to produce 100,000 cars per year. And why not? The slow-selling Windstar, now renamed the Freestar it was replacing, had sold as many as that as recently as 2004. This could be a good alternative to the gas-guzzling Explorer and Expedition SUVs. Ford teased the new car, now called the Flex, in March 2008 with a social media press release. We were in the age of Facebook after all. The Flex provokes and polarizes opinions with its bold new look that may mean it's not for everyone. Ford crossed its fingers that that would also mean big sales. Flex got its official North American launch in June with a customary splashy marketing campaign. The toxic minivan word wasn't anywhere to be seen. This car was most definitely a crossover or a family crossover, and there was good reason for this. Minivan sales were tanking, but crossover sales were booming, so best to jump on the crossover train bound for Moneyville. Quite what category this car really fit into wasn't clear. Even Ford said in their brochure that the Flex isn't easy to describe. It wasn't as high as an SUV, and it was taller than a station wagon. Crossovers were new and the definition was fluid, so why not call the Flex a crossover? Jay Mays had been the lead engineer on the Fairlane concept, but it was Peter Horbury, the stylist of the Volvo S80, who oversaw the styling of the Flex, and it was him that introduced it to the world.
Very linear in this design. The whole thing is very linear, rather like a sandwich, where the black glass area, notice all the pillars are black, and the darkened windows create like a sandwich filling between the body side and the roof. And because of that total separation, we could colour the roof differently from the rest of the body.
Had Ford created a whole new category of vehicle, a cool minivan? It used design statements from the Nissan Cube and Mini Cooper, both cars that were wowing customers. It was very practical, and Ford assured us it drove like a car, not a top-heavy SUV or minivan. The Fairlane concept had been built on the Ford Fusion platform. The Flex was based on the larger Ford Taurus, the same platform used by the Freestyle. Both cars use the same engine, the 262 horsepower 3.5 litre Duratec V6, allied to a 6-speed automatic. When combined with pretty good aerodynamics for such a brick of a car, 0.355, this allowed Ford to pitch the Flex not as a speed demon, but as a fuel economy champion with a whole 24 US miles per gallon on the highway. That might not sound good to Europeans, but for a car this size, it wasn't too shabby. In the summer of 2008, fuel economy was a hot topic. Gas prices had hit a record high. So, not missing an opportunity, Ford pitched their 7-seater as the ideal carpooling vehicle for you and 6 of your co-workers. It could get you out of a fix in the depths of winter too, with the option of all-wheel drive. Peter Horbury said the exterior used a linear design, and that continued on the inside with a flat horizontal instrument panel. Everywhere there were straight lines, but this wasn't bland, with controls laid out in a clear and precise manner. The designers called it the quiet horizon. Everything you needed was below the beltline. The Flex featured 3 rows of seats. The second row could be specified as a bench seat for 3 people, or 2 captain's chairs with an optional compressor-driven fridge in between to keep drinks cool or ice creams sub-zero. The car's height meant getting in and out was a breeze, not too high or low, and once second row passengers got settled in, they discovered a footrest, just like in a Rolls-Royce. The third row seats in the Fairlane concept didn't look comfortable for a long journey. The ones on the Flex were much more substantial, sitting a little higher to get a better view, and they included an auto fold and tumble mechanism to allow easy-ish access. You were still having to clamber through a tight opening, but then this was the case for most cars with 3 rows. There was also an option to electrically stow the third row into the floor to produce a lot of cargo space while still carrying 5 adults. You could even get the third row to flip so you could use them for tailgate parties. And with the second and third rows folded flat, the boxy 5.1 metre long Flex became even more practical. You could easily have 2 adults sleep back there. There were 4 optional sunroof panels, a Vista roof as Ford called it, to bathe all 3 rows in light. Maybe calling these window panels Vista was not the best name given the public apathy to the Windows Vista operating system that had launched just a year earlier. A more popular Microsoft product was the Sync Bluetooth voice-controlled phone and media playback system, now allied to a big display that allowed Ford to add additional services such as weather reports, sports scores, movie times and the local fuel prices, especially useful with the high cost of gas. The navigation system included Sirius Travel Link that downloaded real-time traffic data for major roads, something quite innovative for 2008. There was ambient lighting and a reversing camera. With all these gadgets and heated, electrically controlled leather seats, it's clear Ford were pitching the Flex as something more upmarket. This car could have been sold as a Lincoln. Car and Driver said the car had a Lexus-like attention to detail. Ford started comparing it to Land Rover and some reviewers agreed. It cost a little more than a regular Ford, but not excessively so. And for that, you were getting a lot along with the exciting new looks. That was as long as you thought those looks were exciting and not like a kid's drawing of a hearse. But remember, Ford needed just enough customers to love it to take a good chunk of the market. The initial publicity must have done something because by July, Ford were excited to tell us the Flex was the 7th most popular search on everyone's favourite search engine, yahoo.com. But dark economic clouds were brewing. The US housing bubble burst, sending the economy into freefall. General Motors went bankrupt. Ford was saved that fate, but had to do a lot of belt tightening. One bit of good news was the recession brought gas prices down dramatically. But if you've just been laid off, buying a new $29,000 crossover was the last thing on your mind, no matter how luxurious and practical it was. Reviewers got to drive the Flex and gave their verdict. The driver position wasn't the most comfortable and it was slower than its rivals, with the automatic revving wildly to try to keep up. Slowing the car down again was a challenge with brakes that weren't the best around. The Flex might be lower than an SUV, but some reviewers felt it wallowed like one. Heck, it didn't even drive as well as the less expensive Honda Odyssey minivan. That wasn't to say the ride was bad, it was firm yet soaked up the bumps. You just had to be sure to slow down before a fast bend or you'd make all your passengers sick. Ford continued to improve the Flex. A year later they rolled out Active Park Assist that parked the car for you. There was more power with a 355 horsepower EcoBoost V6. It got the 0 to 60 time down to 6 seconds, impressive for something weighing 2 metric tons. Ford pitched it as V8 performance with V6 fuel economy. A car like that needs good handling, and to Ford's credit, they did improve things with stiffer springs, a lower ride height and revised dampers, but it was still worse than rivals like the Mazda CX-9. And with the economy still in the doldrums, there weren't many who were prepared to pay another $8,000 to get this faster Flex. Maybe it was the economy, maybe it was the polarizing looks, maybe it was the driving position and how it drove, but Flex sales were nowhere near Ford's goal of 100,000 per year. It wasn't even selling better than the Freestar in its last year of production. Customers weren't thinking of minivans or whatever the Flex was. They had only one thing on their mind. I want my SUV. In 2010, the titanium model arrived with larger Flex letters on the front, making the Flex look even more like a Range Rover from the right angle. Ford sought to boost flagging sales with a new marketing campaign, with soccer moms talking about how great the Flex was to own.
Debbie's kids used to call her minivan the loser cruiser. So now that she has the Flex...
Now I've graduated to coolness.
These real housewives traded up to a Ford Flex.
The Flex was hip and cool, something you traded up from an Acura or a Lexus. This was stretching the truth, well, to breaking point, but hey, it was a commercial, that's what they do. 2012 brought a refresh with a new look to the front grille and headlights. On the rear, the line detail on the tailgate was revised, but it retained the same tail lights. Inside, there was a new steering wheel from the Explorer. This was unfortunately the time when car makers were swapping out physical buttons for touch-sensitive ones. They might be cheaper, but they were less usable, especially when driving. The dashboard got instrumentation from the Ford Edge, plus the infamous My Ford Touch infotainment system that had been such a disaster when it launched, but had by now been fixed into something fairly usable, and I'd been on the team that had done the work to get that done. I've got a video on the inside story of the whole My Ford Touch disaster linked above. The refresh and Soccer Mum commercials failed to do much to sales. It seemed it wasn't the economic slowdown, but other factors that were holding back the Flex. When Ford first ramped up production in 2008, they'd spent $1 billion on the factory to allow the production of different cars down the same production line. Whilst the Flex hadn't sold as well as Ford had hoped, not by a long margin, it did mean it could still be produced at relatively low volumes. So the Flex soldiered on beyond the usual 8-year model cycle. It got the Sync 3 infotainment system and Apple CarPlay Android Auto support. The EcoBoost engine got a 10 horsepower boost, there was a sport mode and flappy paddle shifters, which most people probably ignored. Ford announced in 2016 that 2020 would be the end. Almost true to their word, in the end of 2019, the last Flex rolled off the Oakville production line. Just over 300,000 crossovers have been produced in 11 years. The Ford Flex website redirected customers to Ford's range of SUVs with a farewell message to their innovative car. The original Flex brochure said, but most of all, Flex raises questions. It certainly did for many potential customers. What was this car? A retro modern station wagon? A postmodern minivan? The looks that were so lauded in the Fairlane concept became something that turned many off. Car and Driver called it a Mini Cooper that swallowed a school bus. If it drove like an SUV but it had this weird styling, then why not just buy an SUV? It's easy to laugh at the Flex and wonder why Ford bothered, but a company dies by creating mediocrity. Unless they take risks, they won't thrive. Ford did this many times in its history. The Model T, the Mustang, the GT40, the new Edge styling of the Focus, and the 2008 Fiesta that got the look of a mini Aston Martin in 2012. But if you shoot for something new and different, you're bound to get the odd Etzel. If the Flex had handled like a car and had a better driving position, or it stopped better, or not had launched in the middle of a recession, it could have been a hit. It's worrying that Ford approved both the Freestyle and the Flex when both were a sales disappointment. The Freestyle was only on the market for 4 years. But Ford still had the Explorer and the Expedition SUVs to offset that loss. The Freestyle and Flex were an attempt to expand Ford's market presence that failed to pay off. The Ford Flex was a bold design statement that showed Ford wasn't afraid to innovate. The Flex was maybe a wannabe Range Rover, and there's a video about that on the right. There's also a video about the My Ford Touch system if you want to see that disaster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.